Welcome, everyone, to today's deep dive. We really have a genuinely intriguing stack of notes to go through today.
We really do. And I think when you first look at today's source material, you might honestly wonder what practical value it holds for your daily life.
Right, because we're looking at a literal architectural blueprint for the AP History Long Essay question, which, sounds very
It
specific.
sounds incredibly academic.
Yeah, and for those who might not be familiar or maybe you grew up outside the U.S. educational system, AP or advanced placement, is this rigorous program where high school students take college-level exams. And the long essay question, or LEQ, is a notoriously demanding part of that exam.
Oh, absolutely. It's a crucible for a lot of students. But even if you haven't taken a history class in decades or if you never took one at all, stick around. This document is far more than just a grading rubric for a standardized test.
Right. What we actually have here is basically a masterclass in how to construct a bulletproof, persuasive argument entirely out of thin air.
Exactly. When you strip away the academic context of it being a rubric, what you are left with is a highly refined framework for critical thinking. I mean, this document essentially takes the incredibly messy, chaotic, dense web of human history and distills it into a completely repeatable formula for logical thought.
Which is wild when you think about it.
It is. It is fundamentally about the cognitive processing of information. It teaches you how to organize raw data, how to weigh conflicting evidence, and honestly, how to present a compelling case to an audience without losing them in the weeds.
Okay, let's unpack this because the blueprint really does not waste any time. It starts right at the beginning with the introduction paragraph. And the very first step it recommends is contextualization.
Yes, the zoom out phase.
Right. The blueprint asks for 2 to 4 sentences connecting your specific topic to broader historical events, trends, or processes. And it provides these highly structured, almost fill-in-the-blank templates. For instance, it suggests writing something like, by blank time period, blank trend or event had reshaped blank region influencing the topic.
Or they have another one like, during this era, this political or social trend created conditions that shaped the prompt topic.
Yeah, exactly.
What's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism behind that contextualization step. It forces the writer to set the stage before zooming into the minutia of their argument.
Like giving the reader a map before dropping them in the maze.
Totally. Think of it like the opening shot of a movie. A director rarely starts an epic film with an extreme close-up of a character's face in a dark room. They start with a wide, sweeping landscape shot to establish the world, the environment, the whole atmosphere.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Those 2 to 4 sentences do the exact same thing for the reader's brain. Because if you jump straight into a highly specific argument without establishing the broader political or economic trends of the era, the reader is just disoriented. Contextualization provides a necessary cognitive anchor.
I love that movie analogy. You're basically calibrating the reader's mind, letting them know the boundaries of the sandbox you're about to play in. But obviously, once the scene is set, you have to actually deliver the argument.
You have to make a claim.
Right. And this brings us to the core of the blueprint, the thesis or claim. The document states this is a required one-sentence statement that directly answers the prompt. And here's where it gets really interesting. The blueprint demands a very specific formula for this thesis. It goes, despite X, Y is true because A and B.
That formula is the engine of the entire document. Let's break down why it is so powerful for persuasive communication. By forcing the writer to start their thesis with the word despite and identifying factor X, you are immediately acknowledging a counterargument or a complicating factor right out of the gate.
You're not hiding from it.
Exactly. You are explicitly admitting to your audience that the issue is not black and white. And when you do that, it instantly makes your actual claim, which is factor Y, seem significantly more robust, reasonable, and nuanced. You aren't ignoring the opposition, you are enveloping it.
I see the utility in that, definitely. But I have to ask, does relying on a strict formula like despite X, Y, is true risk making the writer sound a bit too robotic? I mean, if everyone follows that exact sentence structure, doesn't it stifle natural communication?
It is a highly restrictive framework, certainly, but it trades stylistic flair for absolute, undeniable clarity. It is designed to prevent the writer from rambling and the reader from guessing.
It's all about efficiency.
Yes, you are essentially front-loading the cognitive work. The reader immediately knows the counterpoint you've considered, the claim you are making, and the 2 primary pillars of support you will use to prove it, all in a single breath.
That structural discipline becomes very apparent when you look at the historical examples they actually provide in the blueprint. Let's look at a few. If you were taking AP World History, the thesis example they give is, despite political fragmentation in Europe, global trade networks expanded between 1450 and 1750 because European states sought economic gain and access to new resources.
It's a brilliant sentence. The writer is forced to weigh the fragmentation directly against the expansion of trade.
Precisely. You aren't just saying trade expanded because states wanted money. You are demonstrating that trade expanded even though the political landscape made it incredibly difficult.
And acknowledging that friction makes the subsequent argument much stronger.
Yeah, and that compression of history carries over into the other examples, too. Looking at the U.S. history prompt, the example is, despite resistance from southern states, Reconstruction advanced civil rights because of federal legislation and activism by African Americans and allies.
Right.
And for European history, it's, despite Napoleon's military successes, the Congress of Vienna restored conservative order in Europe because major powers prioritized stability and balance of power. You are effectively taking massive, chaotic eras of history and
compressing them into a single, highly controlled sentence. It forces incredible discipline. And what the blueprint suggests next is a subtle but effective transition. Once that thesis foundation is laid, it recommends adding a brief hint at the main themes to follow.
like a preview.
Yes. The template is simple. This essay will argue that Theme 1 and Theme 2 were central to understanding the prompt. It is essentially a roadmap for the reader's subconscious, preparing them for the specific evidence that is about to come in the body paragraphs.
And that moves us right into the structure of proof, which the blueprint outlines for body paragraphs 1 and 2. It follows a very rigid sequence: topic sentence, evidence, and analysis.
The holy trinity of essay writing.
Exactly. Now, the topic sentence declares the main idea, but the evidence step seems to be where the blueprint draws a very hard line. It requires 1 to 3 specific historical examples.
Yes, the source is uncompromising on this. It explicitly lists what counts as specific. We're talking names, events, laws, policies, dates, or inventions. The blueprint is effectively stating that vagueness is the absolute enemy of a good argument.
You can't just generalize.
No. You cannot rely on broad statements like people were upset or the economy improved. You have to name the exact policy or the precise invention that caused the shift.
Let's look at the European history example they provide regarding the Edict of Nantes to see how that works in practice. The blueprint provides this example. The Edict of Nantes in 1598 granted religious toleration, reducing domestic conflict and stabilizing France.
Notice what they did there.
Right, they don't just say a new law reduced conflict. By naming the specific edict and the exact year it was enacted, you are providing a structural, load-bearing pillar for your argument. It proves to the reader that your thesis is grounded in verifiable reality.
That specificity signals authority. It immediately builds trust with the reader.
It translates surprisingly well to a corporate setting, actually. Think about pitching a startup or a new initiative to a board. This is the difference between saying, we have a lot of user interest, versus, we acquired 10,000 active users in the third quarter following our beta launch.
Oh, absolutely. The specific data point changes the entire weight of the sentence.
And the blueprint provides similar specific evidence for the other subjects. For AP World, it cites the influx of silver from the Americas increasing European wealth. For U.S. history, it cites the 14th Amendment guaranteeing citizenship and equal protection.
But providing those specific data points is really only half the battle. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the analysis phase is where you separate a mediocre argument from a truly persuasive one. You cannot just list facts like a trivia encyclopedia and expect the reader to do the heavy lifting of figuring out why those facts matter.
They won't do it.
They won't. You have to explicitly explain how that specific evidence supports your thesis.
The blueprint offers templates to force that connection, too. It suggests writing something like, this shows that this piece of evidence contributed to your thesis argument, illustrating your reasoning. So you are actively building the bridge between the raw data and your overarching claim.
Exactly. And the source notes that this analysis should focus on one of 3 specific historical reasoning skills: cause and effect, comparison, or continuity and change. Using that U.S. history example, you aren't just stating that the 14th Amendment existed.
Right.
You are saying, this demonstrates the effect of federal legislation on advancing civil rights, supporting the thesis that Reconstruction made tangible legal progress despite intense resistance. You are actively guiding the reader's cognitive processing so they reach the exact conclusion you want them to reach.
It leaves absolutely nothing to chance. You have your topic sentence to declare your point, concrete evidence to anchor it in reality, and analysis to tell the reader exactly what to think about that evidence.
And you repeat that structure for 2 main body paragraphs.
Right. But then the document outlines a third body paragraph, and it explicitly marks it as optional. It's designed to demonstrate something it calls complexity or synthesis. So what does this all mean? If the first 2 paragraphs are doing their job, providing evidence and analysis to support the thesis, I'm curious why a writer would risk going off track with a third unrequired point. What is the strategic value of this complexity step?
It is a calculated risk, but the strategic value is massive if executed correctly. This optional paragraph is for the writer who wants to elevate their argument from simply competent to genuinely masterful. It demonstrates an understanding that goes beyond rote memorization.
How so?
Well, the blueprint provides templates for this, such as, while an event occurred in one region, a similar pattern can be seen in a different region, showing a connection.
Ah, okay. So it is asking the writer to zoom out again, similar to the contextualization in the introduction, but this time drawing lateral connections across different eras or geographies.
Precisely. It trains the mind to spot historical matrices and overarching human patterns, rather than just viewing history as an isolated linear timeline. For example, if your essay is about the economic drivers of a political revolution in 18th century France, and you can effectively compare that to a similar economic upheaval in 20th century Russia, you are demonstrating that you understand the fundamental mechanics of human society.
You were showing how the specific prompt fits into the grander architecture of human behavior.
Yes. The blueprint also offers another template for this complexity point. Although factor X was significant, factor Y also influenced the topic, demonstrating nuanced historical understanding. It seems like this third paragraph is where you acknowledge that while your thesis is strong, the real world is incredibly tangled.
Yeah, it's a safeguard against tunnel vision.
Exactly. It forces the writer to acknowledge that history, much like modern business or geopolitics, doesn't happen in a vacuum. Everything is interconnected, and demonstrating that you can navigate those interconnections makes you an incredibly credible voice on the subject.
That makes total sense. It builds profound credibility. Moving to the final stage of the document, we reach the conclusion paragraph. And the architecture here mirrors the introduction beautifully.
Full circle.
First, you restate the thesis in a new way. The template is, in conclusion, despite X, Y was true, as demonstrated by A and B. Then, you summarize your key evidence and analysis. And finally, just like the introduction, it offers an optional zoom-out moment to reflect on broader historical significance.
The template for that final thought is, ultimately, this topic influenced a later period, global trend, or other region, highlighting its significance in the larger historical context. It brings the reader back out to that sweeping landscape shot we talked about.
Right.
You started wide, you zoomed in to examine the specific data points, and now you are pulling back to show why those data points matter to the future. It provides a real sense of scale and closure.
It is a very satisfying loop. Now, the final section of the blueprint is titled Quick Tips for LEQ Writing. While these are framed as quick tips for an exam, the underlying psychology of why they work is definitely worth digging into. The first tip advises spending 5 minutes outlining to organize your evidence and arguments before writing.
This is a point about executive functioning. Organization must precede execution. If you begin writing without a structural map, your argument will inevitably wander. You will introduce evidence out of order, or your logic will collapse under its own weight because you haven't thought 3 steps ahead.
You get lost in your own argument.
Yes. Taking 5 minutes to plan the architecture of the argument prevents cognitive overload later in the process.
And the next tip addresses cognitive overload from the reader's perspective. It says to focus on 1 to 2 main ideas per body paragraph for clarity. It is explicitly warning against cramming 10 different points into one paragraph.
The human brain can only hold so much working memory at once. If you introduce a barrage of disparate facts in a single paragraph, the reader just loses the narrative thread. By restricting yourself to 1 or 2 main ideas, you are respecting the reader's cognitive limits, ensuring that the points you do make actually land and are retained.
That ties directly into the blueprint's suggested ratio for evidence and analysis. It recommends aiming for 2 to 3 pieces of specific evidence per paragraph, paired with 1 to 2 sentences of analysis per piece of evidence. This really seems to be the golden ratio of fact to opinion.
It is a crucial balance. If you have too much evidence and not enough analysis, you are just listing trivia. The reader has facts, but no meaning. If you have too much analysis and not enough specific evidence, you are just opining. The reader has your opinion, but no reason to believe it.
Right.
That ratio ensures that every claim is anchored by data, and every piece of data is thoroughly explained.
Another critical tip from the source is the use of transition words. It explicitly tells the writer to start sentences with phrases like, for example, this shows, consequently, or although. These seem like elementary grammar tricks on the surface.
They might seem basic, but they act as cognitive guardrails for both the writer and the reader. Words like consequently or although force the writer to establish a logical relationship between two thoughts. You literally cannot use the word consequently unless you are actually describing an effect.
That's a great point.
These transitions naturally guide the reasoning process and practically force the writer to make logical connections, rather than just placing unrelated sentences next to each other.
And lastly, the blueprint reiterates its core strategy. Use the despite X, Y is true because A and B thesis formula to immediately satisfy the core requirement of the essay. Looking at all these structural rules together, it is a masterclass in controlled communication.
This raises an important question. How can you, the listener, utilize this highly specific AP history framework in your everyday life? You don't need to be analyzing the Congress of Vienna to benefit from this architecture.
Not at all. Think about writing a proposal for a new project at work or trying to secure a budget increase. If you use that thesis formula, despite the initial upfront costs and implementation time, this software integration will increase long-term revenue because of automated efficiency gains and significantly reduced error rates. You instantly sound methodical and highly persuasive.
Yes, you aren't hiding the costs. You are leveraging them to show why the gains are worth it. Or consider how you process the news. We are bombarded with complex, multi-layered stories every single day.
Constantly.
If you force yourself to apply this framework to a news article, identifying the specific evidence the journalist is using, and then isolating the analysis of how that evidence supports their takeaway, it cuts through the noise. It trains your brain to separate raw data from narrative framing. It ensures clarity and depth in how you consume information, just as much as how you produce it.
It is a tool for intellectual self-defense just as much as it is a tool for persuasion. I want to thank you, our listener, for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of a perfect argument. It really is remarkable what we can learn about our own cognitive habits when we look closely at the blueprints of how students are taught to think and write.
It's been a fascinating look under the hood.
Before we let you go, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over or explore on your own. It builds entirely on the rules of the source material we just unpacked, but takes the concept a step further. We spent a lot of time analyzing that core formula. Despite X, Y is true because A and B. The blueprint explicitly advises using this to demonstrate nuance and secure a strong foundation for an argument. But consider what happens when history, or modern life for that matter, doesn't fit neatly into that binary box. What if factor X and factor Y are both equally true, massive in scale, and yet totally irreconcilable? Does forcing the fundamentally messy, chaotic, and often contradictory reality of human history into a standardized logical thesis formula inherently oversimplify the past just to build a cohesive narrative? It's something to keep in mind the next time you or someone trying to persuade you attempts to summarize a vastly complex event into a single, clean sentence. Until next time, keep diving deep.